I'm using my friend's account because my husband knows my usual username. My husband and I have been married for 12 years and have 2 kids. We've been renting the same cramped apartment for nearly a decade while saving for our dream home with strict budgeting, no vacations, and driving old cars. After 5 years of saving, we reached our $60,000 down payment goal. Last month, we found the house. It was in a good neighborhood with great schools, a backyard for the kids, and it fit our budget. The kids were excited. Our older child had already picked room colors, and our younger child talked about building a treehouse. We put in an offer and it was accepted, so we needed to make the earnest money deposit and finalize the mortgage application. When I went to transfer the earnest money, our savings balance was $30,000 lower than it should have been. I thought it was a bank error or identity theft. The thief was my husband. I reviewed our statements and saw multiple large withdrawals over the past year, all made by Marco. $3,000 here, $5,000 there, adding up to about $30,000. None of it was discussed with me. When I confronted Marco, he mentioned family obligations and said he would explain later. I spent the day angry and confused, wondering if everything I trusted was a lie. That evening, I spread the bank statements on the kitchen table and asked him where our down payment was. He looked shocked. He said his childhood friend Kai has been struggling with his restaurant. Marco said Kai came to America with his family after hardships back home. They were very close. Kai's suppliers threatened to cut him off, staff were leaving over unpaid wages, and the restaurant was close to closing. Marco said he had to help, so he withdrew money from our savings without telling me. I pointed out that our down payment was gone and we had lost the house. The agent called to say our financing wasn't ready in time. We couldn't buy the house. Marco defended his actions, saying I wouldn't understand what he owes Kai. When I asked what Kai and Marco survived, he refused to explain. I spent that night in the spare room listening to Marco speak Tagalog on the phone, probably with Kai. We didn't say goodnight. At breakfast the next morning, the kids noticed something was wrong. Our younger child asked when we were moving to the house with the treehouse. Marco and I just looked at each other. It's been 3 days. We're barely speaking. Marco keeps talking about utang na loob, a concept that he says justifies using our savings. I understand cultural differences, but this feels like a breach of trust. The money is gone, the house is gone, and I'm wondering if our marriage is next. If he could hide $30,000, what else is he hiding? He says Kai will pay it back once the restaurant improves, but I've heard it's been on the brink for years. He says I'm being insensitive to his obligations. But aren't I family? Don't our kids count? Don't we deserve a conversation before our future is sacrificed? I'll try to respond to comments. Marco just texted asking to talk tonight, and I'm anxious about what other surprises might come. So Reddit, am I wrong for feeling betrayed? Is this a cultural difference I should accept? Or is it financial infidelity that calls for drastic measures? I love my husband, but right now I don't know if I can trust him. Now for the first update. Thank you everyone for your comments on my original post about Marco secretly using our house down payment to fund his friend's restaurant. I didn't expect that response. It's been about a week since I posted, and things have gotten complicated. As I mentioned, Marco texted asking to talk that night. We talked, and it was worse than I expected. After I put the kids to bed, I sat Marco at the kitchen table with all our bank statements. I asked him to explain everything. He got defensive at first, but when he saw I wasn't backing down, he got his laptop. Then I found out what he had been hiding. Turns out it wasn't just $30,000 he'd given to Kai. It was closer to $45,000 over the past year and a half. Marco showed me the transfer records and what he called documentation of the loans, signed IOUs from Kai with vague promises to pay back when business improved. I was shocked. That wasn't just our down payment. It was almost our entire savings. To address some common questions from my last post. 1. Yes, we have a joint account for our savings, but separate checking accounts for daily expenses. 2. No, I never noticed the withdrawals because Marco handled most of our banking, and I trusted him. Yes, I realize now this was a major mistake. When I could speak again, I told Marco I needed to meet Kai face to face. I needed to understand if this money would ever come back to us. Marco was reluctant, but eventually agreed to set it up for the next day during Kai's restaurant's off hours. Before the meeting, I called Marco's cousin to see if she knew anything. I learned that when they were children in the Philippines, Marco and Kai survived a building collapse during a typhoon. They were trapped for 3 days before rescuers arrived. Kai had found a way to get them water while they were trapped, and may have saved Marco's life. Learning this made me understand Marco's loyalty a bit better. Many of you suggested there must be something deeper than friendship, but it still didn't justify hiding financial decisions from me that affected our entire family's future. When I went to meet Kai the next day, the restaurant was decorated with high-end furnishings and artwork that our money had paid for. I recognized light fixtures that matched ones at a boutique home store priced at $300 each. Kai greeted me with a hug. "Thank you so much for your family's support," he said, as if I had been in on this. I stared at him. Side note, I almost lost it right then, but remembered all your comments about staying calm and getting information first. Thank you for that advice. I asked about repayment timelines. Kai's demeanor changed. He explained supply chain issues, rising food costs, and staffing problems. When I pushed harder, he suggested we become official investors instead of just lenders, offering a small ownership percentage. I pulled out a copy of our rejected mortgage application and photos of the house we lost. I showed him pictures of the rooms our kids had already claimed and described how our 8-year-old had been planning a treehouse with their grandfather. Kai looked uncomfortable, but recovered with more excuses. When I asked to see his business financial statements to understand when repayment might be possible, he admitted he was behind on taxes and had other private investors putting pressure on him. The business was in worse shape than Marco realized, and there were other people in line before us to get paid back. For those wondering, yes, I did record this conversation with consent. Many of you suggested documenting everything, and you were right. At the end, I saw a brand new Audi parked in the employee section. When I asked whose car it was, a server said, "Oh, that's Kai's new car." I was furious. He was driving a luxury car while saying he couldn't repay the money meant to buy a home for our children. I left before I said something I'd regret. On the drive home, I called a financial advisor my friend had recommended. Many thanks to those who suggested this in the comments. The conversation was sobering. Given the amount of money involved and the unlikely prospect of recovering it soon, she suggested we might need to consider bankruptcy if we couldn't rebuild our savings. Bankruptcy. Because my husband gave away our life savings without telling me. Edit for clarity, we're not filing for bankruptcy right now. The advisor was just laying out worst-case scenarios if we can't recover financially from this. When I told Marco about the meeting, about the tax issues, the other investors and the new car, he looked shocked and said, "You have to help family in trouble." I yelled, "We are your family. Your kids are your family, and you've put us in debt to save someone who's taking advantage of you." It's been 3 days since that conversation, and we're still barely speaking. Marco is sleeping in the spare room now. I've been reading books about cross-cultural marriages, thanks to those who recommended some resources, and trying to understand utang na loob more deeply. I'm realizing this isn't just about financial deception. It's about different definitions of family obligation and loyalty. I'm starting to see that while Marco was wrong to hide this from me, his sense of obligation to Kai is deeply rooted in cultural values and shared trauma that I might never fully understand. But that doesn't mean I have to accept being kept in the dark about decisions that affect our family's future. I'll try to respond to comments, but might be slow as I'm meeting with another financial advisor tomorrow and looking into legal options against Kai. Thank you all for your support and advice. I never thought strangers on the internet would be so helpful during this time. Now for the second update. Update 2. It's been almost 3 weeks since my last post. Thank you to everyone who offered advice and support. You all warned me that Marco wouldn't change overnight, and you were right. After learning how bad Kai's finances were, I convinced Marco to meet a financial advisor. The advisor was direct. We need to delay retirement by at least 5 years to recover from Marco's loans to Kai. Marco looked shocked. He hadn't considered the long-term impact of his action. When my parents found out about our financial troubles, they offered to help with a new down payment. Their conditions were humiliating. They would own the house, and Marco wouldn't have control over finances. We agreed that wasn't an option. That night, Marco shared the full story of the typhoon trauma. We sat on opposite ends of the couch, and he described how he and Kai were trapped under concrete for nearly 3 days, unable to move or call for help. Marco said he had given up hope, and Kai found drinking water from a broken pipe. Kai kept him alive during those 3 days. The story helped me understand their bond, but I still insisted on firm boundaries. I made Marco promise no more financial help to Kai without discussing and agreeing together. He agreed, and for about a week things were calmer. Then Marco started working late hours and guarding his phone. The old trust issues returned. I reminded myself we were working through this and that understanding his cultural values mattered, but something felt off. While paying bills last Tuesday, I discovered a new credit card statement showing a $5,000 charge from the previous week to a restaurant supply company. After all the promises and after the advisor laid out our situation, I was upset. I tried calling Marco at work, but he didn't answer. I drove to his office, and a coworker said he had left early. I suspected exactly where he was. When I drove to Kai's restaurant, Marco's car was outside. I sat in my car for 10 minutes, trying to calm down before going inside. I noticed Marco installing new kitchen equipment with Kai. They were laughing as if there were no consequences for our family's future. When I walked in, the bell above the door made them look up. Their expressions shifted from surprise to guilt in seconds. Marco stepped away from the equipment and wiped his hands on a towel. "I can explain," he said. He claimed he used his personal credit card, not our joint account, as if that mattered. Kai said the equipment was essential because health inspectors threatened to shut down the restaurant without upgrades. He said that without this piece of equipment, the business might fail and we would lose our initial investment. I reminded Marco we had just canceled our children's summer camp due to budget constraints. Our kids had been looking forward to it all year. Our 8-year-old cried when we told them they couldn't go. Yet there was money for restaurant equipment. Kai accused me of being culturally insensitive by not understanding utang na loob. He lectured me about my husband's culture as if I hadn't been researching it since this mess began. I had been managing until that moment, but then I told Marco not to come home. I didn't raise my voice. I said it calmly. I think that scared him more than if I'd lost control. I texted our children, who were at a friend's house, that Dad might stay at Uncle Kai's for a while. Then I drove home and cried for an hour. Later that night, Marco's sister called. She's lived in America longer than he has. She explained that in their culture, the debt to someone who saved your life is never fully repaid. But she said, honor doesn't always make a good marriage. She acknowledged that Marco was failing to balance cultural obligations with his family responsibilities. For those wondering, Marco didn't stay at Kai's. His sister said he's with their cousin for now. The kids know we have adult problems, but not the details. We haven't told them about possibly losing the house. It's been 4 days since then. Marco has texted asking to talk about Kai's situation. I'm not ready. I know this requires more than financial restructuring. It means finding a compromise between respecting cultural values and protecting our family's future. Some of you might suggest divorce, but after 12 years and 2 kids, I'm not ready to throw everything away. I still love him, but I don't know if love is enough when trust has been broken twice. Edit. Some asked about legal action against Kai. We've consulted an attorney, but since Marco gave the money willingly and we have IOUs, it's complicated. It could be expensive and might not get the money back, especially if the restaurant is struggling. I'm still not sure what the right path is with Marco in this financial mess, but your comments and support mean a lot. I'll update again when I decide whether to meet with him. Now for the final update on the husband funding his friend's restaurant with our house down payment. First, thank you all so much for your advice and support throughout this whole mess. It truly helped me navigate one of the hardest situations of my married life. It's been almost a month since my last update, and honestly, I wasn't sure I'd ever post again. Marco stayed at his cousin's place for about 3 weeks, and during that time, I consulted with a divorce attorney just to understand my options if things couldn't be fixed. Not that I wanted a divorce, but I needed to know where I stood financially. Protect yourself, people. The kids were really struggling with the separation. Our 8-year-old started having nightmares, and our 10-year-old got into trouble at school for fighting. The breaking point came when my 8-year-old overheard my dad making comments about Marco's foreign priorities. During a family dinner, my kids started crying and defending their dad, saying he was a good person who just made mistakes. Hearing my child defend their father against my parents' casual xenophobia was not something I was prepared for. I called my parents later and explained that regardless of our marital issues, those kinds of comments were completely unacceptable. My dad apologized, but the damage was done. It made me realize that despite everything, I needed to work harder to protect Marco's dignity in front of our children. About 2 weeks into our separation, Marco texted asking to meet. He said there was a new development with Kai's situation that he wanted to discuss in person. I was hesitant but agreed to hear him out. Before our scheduled meeting, I received an unexpected call from someone who introduced himself as Kai's sous chef. He said he'd gotten my number from their employee records where I was listed as an emergency contact for Marco. The sous chef told me Kai had been regularly gambling at a casino about an hour away. Apparently, he'd been doing this for months while claiming the restaurant was barely staying afloat. The sous chef was concerned because Kai had missed payroll again, and he'd seen bank statements showing large cash withdrawals at the casino ATM. I thanked him for the information and immediately started doing some digging. I called a friend whose brother worked security at that casino and asked if he could confirm whether Kai was a regular there. 2 days later, my friend sent me photos of Kai at high-stakes tables taken just 3 days earlier. The images showed him betting what looked like hundreds of dollars per hand, while our kids still couldn't go to summer camp because we couldn't afford it. I agreed to meet both Marco and Kai at a neutral location, a mediator's office that Marco had arranged. I wasn't expecting much, but I figured having a third party present might help keep things civil. I arrived on time and found Marco already seated with a Filipino woman who introduced herself as both a financial counselor and cultural mediator specializing in immigrant families. Marco looked nervous but determined, and I could tell he hadn't been sleeping well. Kai showed up 20 minutes late and immediately launched into a story about needing just one more small loan to get through the month until a guaranteed big catering contract paid out. He kept emphasizing how close they were to turning everything around, how this was the last time he'd need help, how Marco's investment would finally pay off. I let him finish his pitch completely. The mediator watched me carefully, probably expecting me to explode, but I stayed calm. When Kai finally wrapped up, I placed the printed casino photos on the table without saying a word. No one spoke. The mediator's expression darkened as she looked at the images. Kai started stammering through excuses about market research for a potential investor who owns casinos. Even Marco couldn't believe that one. Marco stared at the photos, then quietly asked Kai in Tagalog how long he'd been gambling. Kai refused to answer and kept switching between English and Tagalog, clearly trying to manipulate the conversation. The mediator, who understood both languages, shut that down immediately. She told Kai he had used Marco's cultural values to feed his addiction. She explained that utang na loob was meant to strengthen community bonds, not exploit them. As a Filipino elder herself, she said his behavior dishonored the cultural traditions he claimed to represent. I presented a structured repayment agreement that my attorney had prepared. The document included a clause requiring Kai to attend gambling addiction counseling as a condition of the repayment plan. We weren't expecting to get all our money back, but the agreement established a legal record of the debt and consequences for non-payment. Kai tried one last time to remind Marco of the typhoon, recounting how he'd saved Marco's life. It was emotional blackmail that had worked for years, but something had changed in Marco. He stood up, looked Kai directly in the eyes, and said firmly, "You saved me then, but you're drowning my family now." That moment was when I knew we would be okay. Not gonna lie, I teared up a bit. Marco had finally broken free from the guilt that had driven him to sacrifice our family's security. Kai eventually signed the agreement after the mediator spoke with him privately. His expression was resentful, and I doubt he intends to honor it fully. But now we have legal documentation of the debt. Document everything, people. On the drive home, Marco apologized deeply. He admitted that his loyalty to Kai had become an unhealthy obsession rooted in survivor's guilt rather than true cultural obligation. He'd been in therapy during our separation, working through these issues with a counselor who specializes in trauma. Proud of him for taking that step. We're not out of financial difficulties. We've downsized our housing expectations and extended our timeline by at least 2 years. The kids were disappointed, but understood when we explained that we needed to rebuild our savings. Marco has taken on weekend work to help recover some of the lost funds, and I've started a side hustle doing bookkeeping for small businesses. As for Kai, we haven't heard from him directly since the meeting. His restaurant closed last week. It turns out he hadn't paid rent in months, and word around town is that he's moved to another state. The mediator helped us file a lien against any future business ventures he might start, but we don't expect to see that money again. Marco and I are in couples counseling now, working through the trust issues. Some days are harder than others, but we're committed to rebuilding. The cultural mediator still meets with us monthly to help navigate the balance between honoring Marco's heritage and establishing healthy boundaries. Edit: A lot of you have asked about legal action against Kai beyond the repayment agreement. We considered pursuing criminal charges for fraud, but our attorney advised that it would be difficult to prove criminal intent since Marco willingly gave the money. The costs of a prolonged legal battle would likely exceed any potential recovery, especially now that Kai has left the state. We're focusing our energy on healing our marriage instead of chasing someone who has nothing left to give us. I don't plan on posting about this situation again, but I wanted to thank everyone who offered advice, shared similar experiences, or just provided a virtual shoulder to lean on during this crisis. Your perspectives helped me understand both the importance of cultural values and the necessity of protecting my family's future. We're taking it one day at a time, and that's enough for now.